The night fell over the small village like a heavy blanket, covering everything in silence and coldness. The wind blew gently through the dry branches of trees, creating strange rustling sounds as if someone was whispering from afar. But in the darkness, something was wrong. The empty, quiet streets, the houses that seemed abandoned, all seemed to hold secrets that no one dared speak of. And Lynn, a young woman who had recently moved from the big city, had no idea that she was about to become part of one of those terrifying stories. Lynn, with her long hair and fair skin, worked at the village library, a place that felt old and isolated. She didn't feel comfortable in the small wooden house she rented, even though it seemed cozy at first glance. The quiet nights, with the dim light filtering through the windows, always made her feel like someone was watching her from the shadows. She frequently heard footsteps in the hallway. But every time she opened the door, there was no one there. One evening, after a late shift at the library, Lynn decided to walk home. The path from the library to her house passed over a small bridge with a stream running beneath it, the sound of water flowing mixing with the rustling of fallen leaves. A chill began to creep over Lynn's body and she shivered involuntarily. Though she was used to the quiet of the village, tonight felt different. There was something off in the air. Beneath the moonlight, Lynn suddenly felt the presence of someone, but when she turned around, she saw only the shadows of the trees swaying in the wind. Suddenly, a whispering voice reached her ears, not from afar, but from the very trees around her. "Lynn, we are waiting." The voice was like a cold wave entering her mind. Lynn spun around, looking at her surroundings, but saw nothing but darkness and the branches hanging low. Her heart raced, her throat went dry. She could no longer hear the footsteps, but the feeling of being followed was inescapable. Someone or something was behind her. As she passed by an old, abandoned house at the end of the street, a dim light shone faintly through the window. Lynn couldn't help but feel drawn to it. She couldn't take her eyes off the window, and then she saw it. In the darkness, two shadowy figures stood, their faces blurred, but their eyes shone like two flames in the night. They stood still. Their bright eyes fixed on Lynn, but they didn't move. Lynn's heart stopped. She felt an overwhelming fear, but couldn't move. The darkness seemed to swallow her, pulling her closer to them. Then a strange noise came from behind her. She turned around only to see nothing but the pitch-black night. The laughter, sharp and mocking, echoed from afar. "Lynn, come here, we are waiting." The voice returned, as if someone was standing right next to her. Lynn could no longer move. She rushed forward, but the laughter grew louder, as if someone was playing a game of chase with her. When she finally reached home, Lynn slammed the door shut, her heart racing as if it would leap out of her chest. She glanced outside the window and again saw that figure, just a silhouette in the dark, its bright eyes staring directly at her. Lynn couldn't blink, couldn't look away, because she knew that something terrible was waiting for her. Suddenly, a whisper echoed from behind her, as if coming from inside the house. "You've come, Lynn." Lynn turned around, but no one was there. She quickly turned on the lights, looking around the room, but saw nothing except the cold, eerie stillness. No one could understand what she was going through, but she felt it. Something wasn't just a coincidence. It felt like a sign. Something was waiting for her, and it would not let her go. Lynn couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, something far beyond what she could understand. The events of the night had left her in a state of disarray. Despite locking every door and window in her small house, she couldn't help but feel the weight of unseen eyes on her. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind outside her window sent a chill down her spine. She thought she had just imagined things. After all, the human mind can only handle so much tension. But deep down, Lynn knew that the strange occurrences were no accident. The next morning, Lynn tried to push the lingering fear aside. The sun was shining. Birds chirped outside her window, and the world seemed calm once again. She even laughed at herself for thinking too much the previous night. But as she walked through the village to the library, a strange unease clung to her. The villagers she passed by greeted her with friendly smiles, but there was something unsettling in their eyes, something they weren't saying. That afternoon, while cleaning out the back storage room of the library, Lynn stumbled upon an old, dusty book. Its pages were yellowed, the leather cover cracked with age. It looked out of place among the more modern books surrounding it. Curiosity piqued. Lynn pulled the book out and began flipping through the brittle pages. She quickly realized the book wasn't just a history of the village. It was a record of strange, unsettling events that had occurred there over the years, all tied to the mysterious deaths of two children. The book spoke of twin girls, Sarah and Emily, who had lived in the village over 50 years ago. The two had vanished without a trace, and their disappearance became one of the village's most haunting mysteries. The villagers whispered about strange occurrences in the years that followed, mysterious sounds, visions of two identical girls wandering through the streets, and an overwhelming sense of dread that never quite lifted. The stories grew darker, and rumors started that the girls' spirits still roamed the village, looking for someone to take their place. Lynn felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up as she read the chilling accounts. The more she read, the more she began to see the unsettling connection between the stories and her own experiences. The book mentioned a curse, one that bound the village to the memory of the twins, ensuring that anyone who was unlucky enough to encounter their spirits would suffer the same fate. They would be consumed by the darkness the twins had left behind. Suddenly, the air around her grew cold, and the lights in the library flickered. Lynn snapped her head up, her heart racing. She looked around, but the room was still empty. She shook her head, trying to shake off the growing sense of dread. As she placed the book back on the shelf, she heard it again, the soft whispering from outside the storage room. Her pulse quickened. "Lynn, come find us." Unable to ignore it any longer, Lynn stepped out into the hallway, her legs feeling like lead. She walked through the library, trying to convince herself that it was just her imagination playing tricks on her. But the sound of footsteps, soft yet deliberate, followed her every step. They were behind her, growing louder with each passing second. She spun around, but there was no one there. Heart pounding in her chest, Lynn raced out of the library and into the village. The familiar streets that had once felt like home now seemed foreign, almost suffocating. The laughter of children echoed in the distance. But there was something unsettling in the way it sounded, as if they were mocking her, calling her. As she passed by the old, abandoned house again, she paused. She could feel them, those eyes, watching her from the dark. And this time she didn't hesitate. She walked toward the house, drawn in by something she couldn't explain. As Lynn stepped closer to the front door, a cold gust of wind slammed it open. She froze, her breath caught in her throat. Inside the house, everything was still. The silence was deafening, but beneath it, Lynn could hear the faint sound of something moving, slowly. She crept inside, the floor creaking beneath her feet. The house smelled musty, the walls covered in layers of dust. It felt like time had stopped here, as though no one had stepped foot in this place for decades. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind her, the sound echoing through the empty house. Lynn turned quickly, but it was too late. The house seemed to come alive, the air thickening with a malevolent energy. She could hear faint whispers coming from every direction. "Lynn. You shouldn't have come." Lynn turned, her heart racing, to see two figures standing in the doorway at the far end of the room. They were identical in every way, same height, same long hair, same expressionless faces. Their eyes, dark and hollow, stared at her with an unsettling intensity. But it wasn't just their appearance that terrified Lynn. It was the way they seemed to move slowly, almost like they were floating above the ground, their feet not touching the floor. "Why did you come, Lynn?" One of them spoke. It was a voice that was eerily calm, but with a hidden edge, as if the words carried a promise of doom. The other twin spoke in unison. "We've been waiting for someone like you." Lynn's blood ran cold. She backed away slowly, her mind racing to make sense of what was happening. She had to get out. She had to leave before it was too late. But every step she took, the twins seemed to move closer, their eyes never leaving her, as she turned to run. The house itself seemed to close in on her, the walls shifting, the shadows stretching. The front door was no longer in sight, replaced by a corridor that seemed to stretch endlessly into the darkness. The whispers grew louder until they were all she could hear. And then a soft voice echoed in her ear. "We are always with you, Lynn, always." Lynn screamed, but no sound came out. The darkness swallowed her whole. Lynn woke with a start, gasping for air as if she had been submerged in cold water. Her eyes snapped open and she found herself lying on the floor of the old house, not sure how she got there. The dust covered her hands and clothes, and the heavy air felt suffocating. Her heart hammered in her chest as she struggled to sit up, but everything around her was still, eerily silent. The twins, were they real? Had it all been a nightmare? She rubbed her eyes, trying to force herself to believe that it was just a trick of her mind. But the feeling, the weight of something watching her, lingered in the air, thick and unyielding. She staggered to her feet, her body trembling. The house seemed so much darker now, as if the very walls were closing in on her. The temperature had dropped significantly, and the faint sound of whispers returned, this time sharper, clearer. "Lynn, you're not safe." She spun around, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The room was empty, but the whispers were coming from everywhere now. It felt like they were inside her head, like the house itself was alive, feeding off her fear. Every corner of the room seemed to darken, as if the shadows were growing, reaching for her. A sound, a scraping noise, came from above, followed by soft thuds like footsteps moving across the ceiling. Lynn's pulse raced. She backed away toward the door, but it wouldn't open. The doorknob wouldn't turn, no matter how hard she tried. The house was locking her in. She turned, panicking, her eyes desperately scanning the room. And then through the corner of her eye she saw it, a figure in the far corner of the room, standing just outside the pool of light. Lynn's breath caught in her throat. The figure wasn't human, not entirely. It was tall, its body twisted in an unnatural way, long limbs bent at sharp angles. Its face, or what might have been a face, was shrouded in shadow, but Lynn could see the two pale, glowing eyes staring at her with an intensity that sent a chill through her entire body. The figure moved forward, its head tilting in a way that made Lynn's stomach churn. It was the thing that had been whispering to her. The figure's voice was deep and cold, like the sound of something scraping across stone. "You think you can escape, Lynn? You think running will save you? The twins, they are waiting." Lynn's body froze. The words felt like a curse, a binding, something she couldn't escape. Her legs trembled, but she forced herself to move, to fight against the overwhelming terror that threatened to paralyze her. She ran, heart pounding, down the narrow hallway toward what she thought was the front door. The whispers grew louder as she moved, filling her head with the same phrase over and over. They're coming for you." Her feet slapped against the cold wooden floors as she rushed down the hall, desperate for any way out. But when she reached the door, it was gone. The hallway stretched endlessly before her, the walls closing in like a trap. She was running in circles, the house laughing at her attempts to escape. Suddenly, she heard the sound of footsteps behind her, slow and deliberate, as if the figure, whatever it was closing in. Her skin crawled, her senses screaming that she needed to keep moving, keep running. But every direction she turned, every step she took, the house seemed to mock her, making her feel like she was being pulled deeper into its grasp. Then, in the distance, she saw them, two figures standing in the far corner of the hallway, bathed in dim light, Sarah and Emily. The twins. Their faces were pale and emotionless, their eyes wide and unblinking. They stared at Lynn as she approached, their expressions cold and lifeless. She could hear their voices, faint at first, but growing louder with each step. "Join us, Lynn. You're one of us now." She felt herself stop, the words pulling her in. Her mind screamed to move, to run. But her feet wouldn't obey. It was like her body had betrayed her, like the house had begun to control her, to turn her into one of them. The twins were no longer just figures of her imagination. They were real, and they were waiting to claim her. One of the twins took a step forward, and Lynn felt a cold breeze wash over her. The twins' hand reached out, fingers twisted and long like a skeletal claw, and Lynn felt herself drawn closer, pulled into the darkness. She gasped and tried to pull back, but the air felt thick and suffocating. Her body was growing weaker, her strength slipping away as if the very house were draining her. "You can't run, Lynn, you never could." Lynn's eyes filled with terror as she felt herself being pulled into the twins' grasp, but just as her vision began to fade, she heard a sound, a distant voice, faint like a memory. It was a voice that hadn't been in the house, but outside from the village. "Lynn." The voice echoed in her mind, clearer now. She couldn't see the figure, but she could feel it. Someone was out there, someone who had come for her. It was her only chance, her only way out. With everything she had left, Lynn twisted in the twins' grasp, breaking free of the pull. The world around her seemed to collapse into darkness as she fought her way through, her legs giving way beneath her. She hit the floor hard, and when she opened her eyes, she was no longer in the house. But the night wasn't over, and she wasn't safe yet. Lynn's breath came in ragged gasps, her chest rising and falling like the waves of a storm-tossed sea. She didn't know how long she had been lying on the cold ground, but the sharp chill that bit into her skin made her realize she wasn't where she had been. The darkness around her felt thick, like a blanket of shadows pressing down on her from every side. She blinked rapidly, trying to adjust her eyes to the dim surroundings. It was still night. The village sounds were muffled, distant. There was no light, no moon. Air was damp, colder than it had ever been in the village. Lynn pushed herself to her feet, her body aching from the fall. She felt disoriented, as if the very fabric of reality had unraveled. Her hands trembled as she wiped the dirt and grime from her clothes, but the strange feeling in her chest wouldn't leave. It was as though the curse of the twins had followed her into this new place. She stood in what appeared to be a dense forest, the trees towering above her like ancient sentinels. The ground was slick with moisture, and every step she took seemed to echo, too loud in the silence. But it wasn't just the silence that unsettled her, it was the stillness. There was no movement, no rustling of leaves, no animals in the distance. The world around her felt frozen in time. Lynn's heart raced, her mind reeling. How had she ended up here? This couldn't be real. Was she still in the house, still under the twins' spell? She turned around, hoping for a sign, a clue. All she saw was darkness. The trees stretched endlessly before her, and the thick fog that now surrounded her only made everything more unnerving. Suddenly she heard the faintest whisper, so soft it was almost imperceptible. Lynn, it was that same voice, that same haunting, familiar whisper that she had heard before, only now it seemed closer, louder, more real. Lynn spun around, her heart pounding in her ears, but once again there was no one there. Her pulse quickened. She couldn't stay here, she had to find a way out. But where was the way out? How had she even gotten here? A low growl echoed from somewhere deeper in the forest, and Lynn froze, her body stiffening in fear. It wasn't an animal, at least not one she recognized. It was too deep, too guttural. The sound echoed off the trees, growing louder, closer. Lynn took a hesitant step back, her breath coming in short gasps as her feet found a path barely visible beneath the undergrowth. She didn't think, she just moved, the instinct to flee taking over. With each step, the whispers grew louder. Lynn, the voice was no longer faint, it was growing, calling to her, a siren's song. And then she saw them, the twins, Sarah and Emily. They stood in the middle of the path, their figures bathed in an eerie, unnatural light. Their eyes were wide, reflecting a pale glow that seemed to come from nowhere. They stared at her with an intensity that made Lynn's skin crawl. Their faces were blank, emotionless, but their eyes were full of something else, something dark, something hungry. Lynn, they both said in unison, their voices smooth and cold. You've come to us at last. Lynn's blood ran cold. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't move. The twins were here in front of her, and no matter how much she wanted to turn and run, she couldn't. It was as if the very earth beneath her feet was holding her in place. One of the twins stepped forward, her pale hand reaching out, the long, bony fingers twitching with unnatural movement. You're the one, Lynn, the twin spoke. Her voice laced with an unearthly calm, the one we've been waiting for. Lynn shook her head, her body shaking with terror. No, I don't want this. I'm not like you. I don't belong here. The twins' lips curled into twisted smiles, and Lynn realized with a sinking feeling in her stomach that they weren't just standing in front of her. They were surrounding her, closing in like phantoms, slowly closing in on their prey. Her breath caught in her throat. Come with us. The other twin whispered, her voice low, coaxing. You've been chosen, Lynn, chosen to join us, to be one with us. We are your family now. Lynn's heart raced faster, a wild, frantic beat. She backed up against a tree, the cold bark pressing into her spine. I won't go with you, she screamed, finally finding her voice, but the twins didn't seem to hear her. They took another step closer, and suddenly the world around Lynn seemed to shift. The trees, the fog. The eerie moonlight, it all began to distort, as though the fabric of reality was bending, twisting, and breaking apart. The ground beneath her feet felt like it was sinking, pulling her down, drawing her deeper into the darkness. Escape is impossible, the twins said in unison, their voices echoing, overlapping. You can never run from us, Lynn. We've always been with you. And just like that, the world collapsed around her. She opened her eyes, gasping for air, only to find herself back in the village, standing alone in the middle of the empty street. The cold had returned, the fog still lingering in the distance, but this time it was different. Something in the air felt off. Lynn knew she was no longer just a victim of her imagination. She had crossed a line. She was part of their story now. Lynn had made a grave mistake by coming back. The twins would never let her go. The curse had already taken hold. Lynn's chest tightened as the fog around her thickened, swirling like a living thing, wrapping itself around her legs, pulling her into the deepening darkness. Her heart pounded relentlessly in her chest, the sound deafening in her ears. She had tried to escape the twins, the forest, the haunted whispers, but it was as if the very air in this place had conspired to keep her there. No matter how fast she ran, she couldn't seem to find her way out. She stumbled forward, her legs heavy with exhaustion, her mind racing. The twins' words echoed through her thoughts over and over again. "You can never run from us, Lynn. We've always been with you." She couldn't make sense of it. How could this be real? How could they have always been with her? The fear creeping up her spine was no longer just about being trapped in this cursed forest. It was about something much darker. The twins were no longer just ghosts. They were part of her. The fog parted for a moment, revealing a small clearing. Lynn's breath caught in her throat as she looked around, trying to make sense of the world. She felt dizzy, as if the ground beneath her feet was shifting, as if time had stopped. The clearing was eerily quiet, save for the faint rustling of the leaves, but something was wrong. The trees around her seemed to stretch upward, their branches twisting like claws, as though they were watching her. Then from the shadows, she saw them again, the twins. Standing in the middle of the clearing, bathed in an unnatural light that flickered like a dying flame. Their eyes gleamed with something cold, something ancient. They were no longer just children, no longer just victims of their own curse. The girls were something much darker now, something more dangerous. "Lynn," the twins whispered in unison, their voices soft but sharp like knives. "You've been chosen. You will join us. You'll never be alone again." Lynn's throat closed. A wave of nausea washing over her. She wanted to run, to scream, to do anything to break free from the suffocating grip they had on her, but her body refused to obey. She could only stand frozen, the world spinning around her as the twins advanced slowly, their feet barely touching the ground. "Why are you doing this?" Lynn gasped, her voice trembling with terror. "What do you want from me?" The twins stopped, their faces emotionless, as if they had already heard this question countless times before. One of them tilted her head, the same eerie, unsettling smile playing on her lips. "We don't want anything, Lynn," she replied softly, the words coming out like a chant. "We're not here to take anything from you, we're here to give you everything." The other twin reached out, her hand cold and skeletal, fingers stretching unnaturally long. Lynn recoiled, but the girl's voice wrapped around her like chains. "You will be with us, Lynn," she said, her voice carrying an unnatural echo. "You will be part of us forever. You will never feel pain again. You will never be alone." Lynn's mind raced as the twins' words sank in. She had always felt like an outsider, always isolated in her life, but this was different. This wasn't about feeling alone anymore. This was about losing herself, her very essence. This was a curse, a trap she couldn't escape. With all the strength she had left, Lynn bolted forward, her legs burning with exhaustion, but adrenaline fueling her every step. She could hear the twins laughing behind her, their voices sharp and mocking, but the clearing seemed endless. The trees closed in on her as if they were alive, shifting, their twisted branches reaching out to pull her back. She ran blindly, her heart thudding in her chest, each step feeling heavier than the last. But no matter how hard she tried, the darkness followed her. It clung to her like a thick fog, and in the distance, she could hear the sound of those whispers again. Lynn were waiting, her body was giving up. She had nothing left to fight with, but still she couldn't stop. It wasn't just the fear that drove her forward, it was something else, something deeper, buried in her subconscious. Was it really them that were following her, or was it something inside herself that she couldn't escape? Finally, Lynn collapsed to the ground, her legs buckling beneath her. The dirt beneath her fingers felt real, solid. She looked up into the inky black sky, trying to catch her breath. For a brief moment there was silence, but then the laughter returned. The twins stood before her once again, their faces too close, their cold eyes burning into her. The warmth from her body drained away, leaving only the cold, their hands reaching for her, offering her nothing but darkness. And then, with a voice that seemed to reverberate inside her skull, the twins whispered, "We are you." Lynn screamed. But no sound came out. The darkness swallowed her whole. Lynn's body trembled uncontrollably, her breath shallow as she struggled to regain control of her senses. The darkness, thick and suffocating, surrounded her like an inescapable abyss. The twins' laughter echoed in her mind, a cruel, mocking reminder that she was caught in their web. She had felt fear before, but nothing like this. Nothing had ever made her feel so small, so utterly powerless. The ground beneath her feet began to shift, and Lynn felt as if the very earth was sinking into an endless void. Her thoughts scattered in a whirlwind of panic, but she refused to let the terror consume her. She couldn't give in, not now. She forced her eyes open, searching for something, anything that could offer her a way out. Suddenly, the shadows around her began to move, the air thickening with an unnatural weight. Lynn's head swam as she struggled to stand, but her legs felt weak, like they could collapse at any moment. She could hear whispers, voices overlapping, all speaking her name. But among the whispers, there was one voice that stood out, familiar, comforting. Lynn, Lynn, can you hear me? It was a woman's voice, soft but urgent. Lynn's heart skipped a beat. It was Dolores, her old friend, the one person who had always been there for her. The voice felt like a lifeline in the sea of darkness, pulling her back from the edge. She clung to it, focusing on the sound, willing herself to move toward it. But as she tried to push through the oppressive fog, she stumbled into something cold and hard. Her hands reached out, and to her horror, she realized she had fallen into a mirror. Her hand slid against the glass, cold and unforgiving, as the reflection of her own face stared back at her, distorted by the swirling shadows. The mirror shimmered with an eerie glow, and Lynn felt an overwhelming urge to touch it, to understand why the mirror had appeared, why it felt so alive. Her fingers trembled as they made contact with the surface, and the moment she touched it, a shock ran through her body, freezing her in place. Her reflection in the mirror began to change. The face that stared back at her wasn't her own. It was the twins, Sarah and Emily, both of them staring at her with cold, hollow eyes. Their lips parted and their voices came through the mirror, their words distorting the very air around her. "Lynn, don't you see?" they whispered in unison. "You're already one of us. We've been inside you all along. The fear, the darkness, it's always been part of you." The words sent a jolt through Lynn's chest, as though a part of her soul was being torn away. She gasped for air, her heart racing. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think straight. The mirror began to swirl, pulling her in, dragging her deeper into the reflection. Her body started to fade, becoming part of the glass. The twins' faces shifted, their eyes glowing brighter, closer. "No," Lynn screamed, but no sound left her mouth. She felt her body melting into the mirror, becoming one with the shadows that lurked there. The twins' eyes never left hers, their faces twisting into grotesque grins. But just as Lynn felt herself slipping completely into the abyss, a sudden, sharp pain pierced her chest. It wasn't physical, it was something far worse. It was the realization, the truth she had been too afraid to face. The twins weren't just haunting her, they were inside her, a part of her very being. The reflection of Lynn in the mirror began to distort again, but this time it wasn't the twins' faces she saw. It was her own, her true face, stripped of the fear and shadows that had consumed her. For the first time, she saw herself clearly as she was meant to be. A woman who had fought, had struggled, and had loved too much without receiving anything in return. And that was when she understood. The twins had been using her. They had been feeding on her fear, her guilt, her pain. But now, something inside her snapped. She couldn't allow them to control her any longer. Not this time, not ever again. With a sudden surge of strength, Lynn pulled away from the mirror, breaking free of its grip. She gasped for air, her body shaking from the effort. The shadows in the forest seemed to retreat as she stood tall, no longer afraid, no longer trapped. "I am not you," Lynn said through gritted teeth, her voice steady despite the pounding in her chest. "I will not be your prisoner. I will not be part of your curse." The mirror shattered before her eyes, the glass exploding into thousands of shards that scattered across the ground. The darkness around her seemed to shriek, as if in pain, as the curse began to unravel. The twins' faces flickered one last time before disappearing into the void. Lynn stood in the clearing, breathing heavily but alive. The forest was no longer closing in on her. The fog began to dissipate, and the first rays of dawn broke through the darkness, spilling light onto the forest floor. But Lynn knew this wasn't over. She had broken free, but the twins were still out there, watching, waiting. They would never truly leave her, but she was no longer the frightened girl she had once been. She had fought them and won, and now she would take control of her own fate. The journey wasn't over yet, but Lynn had found something she hadn't had before, the strength to face whatever darkness was still waiting. Lynn stood frozen in the clearing, her body trembling from exhaustion. But there was a new sense of clarity in her eyes. The forest around her, once so suffocating, now felt distant and foreign, as if it had no power over her anymore. The twins were gone, their haunting presence fading into the past. The darkness that had once claimed her seemed to dissipate with the rising sun, replaced by a sense of quiet triumph. But even as the fog began to lift, the weight of everything she had been through still clung to her. She had faced the twins, had fought off the fear, the torment they had planted inside her. Yet Lynn knew that the real battle wasn't with the spirits, it was with herself. The curse of the twins was not just a supernatural force, it was the reflection of the darkness she had carried inside her for so long. Her breath steadied, and with it, her resolve grew stronger. No longer would she live in the shadows of others. No longer would she let fear dictate her life. Lynn had learned the hardest lesson of all. In order to break free, she had to reclaim her own power, her own light. And that wasn't something the twins or anyone else could take from her. Behind her, Lynn heard footsteps. She turned to find Dolores standing a few paces away, her face soft with concern, but also a quiet understanding. Lynn, Dolores' voice was gentle, yet it carried a weight of solidarity. You've made it through, you've faced your demons, but now, you have to let go of what's behind you. You have to stop running from the past. Lynn looked at Dolores, her eyes filling with both gratitude and sorrow. She had always been there supporting her, even when Lynn hadn't been able to see the way forward. Now she realized Dolores was more than just a friend. She was the anchor Lynn had needed to find her way back to herself. I'm not running anymore, Lynn said, her voice steady but filled with a quiet strength. I've spent so many years letting others dictate my life, living for them, but not anymore. I won't let anyone else control my story. Dolores smiled softly, a glint of pride in her eyes. She knew the weight of Lynn's words. Lynn had spent years trying to please others, hiding her own needs and desires behind the veil of sacrifice. But now she was taking control. She was stepping into the light, ready to live her life on her own terms. Together they walked through the clearing, the sunlight now fully illuminating the path ahead. The trees, once menacing, now seemed like silent witnesses to Lynn's victory. As they approached the small house Dolores had brought her to, Lynn felt a strange sense of peace. It wasn't just the quiet surroundings or the warmth of the morning sun. It was the realization that she had overcome something far greater than the twins. She had overcome her own fear. They reached the house, and Lynn paused for a moment, taking a deep breath. This was it. This was her new beginning. I'm ready, Lynn whispered, almost to herself. I'm ready to start over. As they stepped inside, Lynn felt the weight of her past begin to lift. The house was simple, but it was hers. It was a place where she could finally be herself without fear, without judgment. It was a place where she could heal and rebuild. The quietness of the house wrapped around her like a comforting embrace. Lynn walked to the small window, looking out at the world beyond. The village, the forest, and the memories of everything that had happened felt distant now. Like a dream fading with the morning light, Lynn turned to Dolores, who was quietly watching her, waiting for her to speak. And when Lynn did, it was with a new sense of clarity, a new understanding of herself. Thank you, Lynn said softly, her voice filled with gratitude. You've shown me what it means to live for myself. I'll never forget that. Dolores smiled, her eyes warm and knowing. You've always had the strength, Lynn. You just had to find it. And in that moment, Lynn understood she had always had the power to change her own life. It wasn't the twins or the darkness they brought that had controlled her. It had always been her own fear, her own doubts, but now she was free from the curse of the past, free to live the life she deserved. As the days passed, Lynn found a new rhythm in her life. The mornings were filled with the soft light of dawn, the afternoons with peaceful walks through the village, and the evenings spent in quiet reflection. For the first time in years, she was no longer just surviving, she was living. And as she sat by the window one evening, watching the sunset, she realized that she was finally at peace. The laughter of the twins, the darkness that had haunted her, all of it had been a part of her journey. But now she was walking a new path, one where she would never again be afraid of the shadows. Lynn was finally free.